How did Coca-Cola go from being a weird experiment to become one of the most valuable brands in the world? The story of Coke is an interesting one, because it wasn't exactly meant to be a refreshing soft drink for the masses. It was actually created as a weird medicine. John Stith Pemberton was an Atlanta pharmacist who had a really good business going. He owned the popular soda fountain at the local drugstore and would make money by serving up medicinal concoctions that were part soda pop and part snake oil. You know, back before everyone started taking their medicine in pill form. People would go to places like Pemberton's to get their daily dose of whatever was ailing them. And since these medicines tasted horrible, pharmacists would mix them with carbonated water to make them more palatable. But this all changed when Coca-Cola came onto the scene. This new invention stole Pemberton's customers away, because instead of having to buy a custom drink for each ailment, they could just grab a bottle of Coca-Cola off the shelf. So in order to stay afloat, Pemberton decided he needed to reinvent himself. He experimented with recipes for a while until he finally landed on what he thought was a real winner, a syrup made with coca leaves, coconuts, and a secret blend of spices that would be mixed with carbonated water and sold as a patent medicine called Coca-Cola. Now here's the thing. Back then, coca leaves were thought to be a miracle cure for everything from headaches to indigestion to depression. The problem was the FDA didn't quite see eye to eye with this assessment. Once they found out that Coca-Cola contained trace amounts of cocaine, which is derived from coca leaves, they forced Pemberton to reformulate his recipe to remove the stimulant. He complied, but he kept the name Coca-Cola because he figured the association with the coca leaf would make people think it was healthier than it actually was. And in 1894, Pemberton began selling the syrup in drugstores all over Atlanta where people could buy a bottle and take it home. It wasn't long before the soft drink took off and spread to other parts of the country. By 1899, there were more than 100 bottling companies producing Coca-Cola and selling it in restaurants, grocery stores, and general merchandise shops. But even though Coca-Cola had officially hit it big, the company itself was still small time compared to the global juggernaut it would eventually become. In fact, for most of the early 20th century, Coca-Cola remained a relatively regional phenomenon mostly enjoyed in the southern and western United States. That is until the company developed a very unique marketing strategy. Asa Griggs Candler Jr. was the son of the man who bought Pemberton's company and turned it into a nationwide brand. When he took over as CEO in 1919, Coca-Cola only earned $40 million per year. That might sound like a lot of money, but considering the company had been around for more than 25 years at that point, it hadn't really grown much since its early days. So Asa wanted to change that. His plan involved building a massive marketing machine that would bombard Americans with images of polar bears drinking Coca-Cola, Santa Claus sipping on Coke while relaxing in a tropical paradise, and beautiful women lounging poolside with Coke in hand. To fund this endeavor, Asa took Coca-Cola public in 1916 so that the company could use investors' money to expand. It worked better than he could have hoped. Within 2 decades, Coca-Cola was earning $1 billion per year. But Asa didn't stop there. He wanted his product to be the choice of a new generation. So in 1931, he began the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation to award scholarships to students across the country. He also began sponsoring community events and civic projects in cities where Coca-Cola was sold, such as the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, where the company built a 200-foot tall tower with a restaurant at the top that featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the fairgrounds. The Great Depression may have put a damper on things for most businesses, but not Coca-Cola. And when World War II rolled around, Asa used his influence to keep production high so that American soldiers could enjoy a taste of home when they were overseas. But as the war drew to a close and Americans began returning home, Asa knew he had to come up with a new way to keep sales booming. He turned to one of his employees, a copywriter named Don Withers, to come up with a slogan that would encapsulate the feeling of refreshment people got when they drank Coca-Cola. After some contemplation, Withers came up with the pause that refreshes. It was catchy, it was memorable, and it became one of the longest-running advertising campaigns in history. Coca-Cola would use some variation of the pause that refreshes in their ads until 1981. Meanwhile, competition was heating up. In the late 1940s, several competing brands emerged, including Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, and RC Cola. In an effort to differentiate itself, Coca-Cola began emphasizing the fact that its syrup is made with real sugar rather than artificial sweeteners. They even went as far as to release an ad claiming that Pepsi contained 21 grams of added sugar, even though that was completely false. To prove their dominance, in 1971, Coca-Cola released an ad showing polar bears frolicking in the Arctic and drinking Coke. At first glance, it seemed a bit random, but it was actually a brilliant marketing move. Polar bears don't live in the Arctic Circle. Instead, they live in the northernmost parts of the Northern Hemisphere, which includes Canada, Russia, Greenland, and Scandinavia. That's why when the ad aired in the US, viewers were initially confused about why polar bears would be drinking Coca-Cola. It was a mystery that piqued their interest enough to stick around and find out the answer. But it was also an ad campaign that resonated with people on a deeper level. Polar bears are innocent creatures that are unapologetically themselves. They don't care what other animals think of them. They do what they want to do when they want to do it. It was a message that young people especially could get behind, which helped Coca-Cola become the beverage of choice for generations of teenagers. By the 1980s, Coca-Cola was huge. But once again, Ass's son, Robert Woodruff, who had taken over the company after Ass's death, needed a new way to keep sales growing. He focused on expanding the product line. First came Diet Coke in 1982, followed by Cherry Coke in 1985 and caffeine-free Coke in 1987. Then, in 1989, Coca-Cola introduced a citrus-flavored variant called Coke with the tagline "Always Coca-Cola, always real." Unfortunately for Robert, his attempts to diversify proved unsuccessful. Each new flavor failed to gain traction and sales began to decline. So in 1993, he was replaced by Douglas Ivester, who would later be replaced by Douglas Daft. Under their leadership, the company focused on international expansion, which proved extremely fruitful. Today, Coca-Cola is sold in more than 200 countries, with the majority of its revenue coming from outside the United States. But this doesn't mean Coke has neglected its domestic market. One of the company's most successful campaigns in recent history was the Share a Coke campaign, which began in Australia in 2011. The idea was simple. Instead of having blank labels, Coca-Cola bottles would feature names that were common in each country. Where the campaign was launched, it encouraged people to buy multiple bottles and share them with friends, which boosted sales and brand loyalty. But Coca-Cola's domination of the soft drink industry hasn't been without controversy. In the 1990s, lawsuits claimed that the caramel coloring used to give Coke its brown hue contained a cancer-inducing chemical. Coke responded by changing the formula and conducting their own studies, which concluded that their caramel coloring was perfectly safe. More recently, activists have slammed Coke for allegedly misleading consumers by using deceptive marketing tactics. For example, in 2018, a lawsuit alleged that the company falsely advertised its Coca-Cola Energy as a healthy alternative to coffee or other energy drinks when it was really just Coke with a different label. Another lawsuit filed that same year claimed that Coke knowingly misled consumers into thinking it was okay to consume large quantities of its beverages by sponsoring seemingly wholesome events, like the Special Olympics. These controversies aside, Coca-Cola remains one of the most iconic brands in the world with a net worth of $83.7 billion, and it looks like the company will continue to thrive for many years to come.